Hi. Okay, so let's talk about temperature control. A lot of things going on, a lot of new information, a lot of updates, a lot of things happening. So what is it? Basically, it's the ability to set an upper limit that your coil will not try to go above. It's not really the ability to have it achieve that temperature necessarily any quicker than traditional methods, but once it hits that temperature, it has the ability to sense that and pull the power back and keep you at a pretty smooth, even level. I say pretty because there's different iterations on how each company is using it right now, and there's still a lot of growing to do on every side of the fence. But in general, it more or less does close to what it says it does. It'll at least let you set a threshold that it will try not to go beyond. Um, Now, what do I mean by that? The temperature numbers that are on the screen is still a little off. There's a lot of guesswork, and once you've got a particular ADDI dialed in, it'll pretty much stay that way, or at least without the DNA's refinement issues. But we'll touch on that in a sec. But more or less, once you get a number, it'll pretty much stay there. But you can't necessarily trust 400 degrees to be the same on every single atomizer, and how the connections work actually plays the biggest part of that. If you're able to hook the coil directly to the 510 connector, or even better yet, straight to the board, then you wouldn't have a lot of these limitations. But some atomizers use springs in their connections, some have adjustable 510 pins, and all those will play just a subtle difference into the performance and the effectiveness of the temperature limiting. And I will use the word limiting versus control, because I feel control should give you the ability to achieve that number in a controlled manner also. And more or less that's what the wattage setting, or now the Yeehy, they're going with joules. But in general, that's what I feel that setting's still doing the most of. Anyway, how does temperature control work? Essentially, you use a specific kind of wire, nickel or Ni200 it's called, but it has the basic property that as the heat increases, so does its resistance. Traditional Canthal has a very stable resistance under different temperature conditions, ambient temperature and power applied. It pretty much wants to keep the same resistance. Nickel, on the other hand, is pretty much a direct relationship. As the heat goes up, its resistance goes up for distance. So essentially, they can watch that resistance rise, and will watch assume that the temperature is going up correspondingly. Now, the word assume, there's a couple of limitations in there as well. It uses the average coil temperature, so the longer your legs are versus the coil distance, that will tend to throw your numbers off a little bit. And the connections themselves, if your wicking isn't perfectly seated over the entire length of the coil, you might have a little hot spot. That will play into the average temperature, because that little section's resistance will go up higher than the rest of it, so it'll give an overall higher average reading, thinking its temperature is too high, when in fact you just got this one little section that's getting real hot and the rest of it's doing whatever. So building good coils has a lot, will give you a more stable and predictable temperature experience. But from what I've messed with it, it still seems to be each atomizer will have as much of its own subtleties and nuances as the build itself. So they both kind of have to work together. My suspicion is that as you go through and build nickel builds on a lot of your existing stuff, you might hit a couple atomizers that just won't go along with the program. Heard some issues with the K-Fun 4 because there's a spring in the 510. Squape, just a lot of people mention, but in most cases the fix is just to run your temperatures differently, set yourself a little bit different, and it will still be more or less stable. So it's never the end of the world yet that I've seen. I've done it on Genesis builds, dripper builds, tank builds, you name it. It will at some form function, but you might have to tweak those numbers to get the experience. You know, the temperature you're shooting for might not correspond to what's on the screen. Let's put it that way. But once you get it set up, now the DNA 40, they brought something to the table called refinement, and its idea was to continuously remeasure those numbers and tweak itself. Early iterations didn't go over too hot. Now I've just picked up one of the latest that has the atomizer lock, which is the ability that once it reads that resistance, to not basically have that refinement involved anymore, to just leave that number alone. My experience has been that when you lock in an addy, it's good. It really finds its happy spot, and again, the same limitations with other devices, that the numbers might not exactly match what's on the screen, but the overall sense of turning your temperature up gives you warmer, more, you can burn it, bring it down, cool it off to where it won't even vape. Those functions still apply. So, uh, and that's, I guess, brings me to the other point. Each company is using a slightly different approach. My feeling is that Evolve pretty much gets the credit for inventing this technology and getting it to production quality. And it even in its earliest states, I think for as new as it was, it was, we should give it the credit of calling it production quality, but that's just my opinion. Now, I do have one later ones. I think if I'd had one of the earlier ones where it was changing it on itself, and every time I picked it up, I had to keep messing with it, I'd probably get frustrated. But I'll tell you, the SXM class, that battery life, just terrible compared to the DNA 40. Battery health monitoring. I don't know if there's any of that going on yet with the EE. We just haven't seen any evidence of it on the scopes. So I'm still thinking that the DNA 40 is probably a safer choice, and it has a nice little boost function. So, but there's also a Smoke Tech M80 that's running around out there, and from what I've seen, that one's still got a little ways to go on it. It's probably a good idea from what I've heard. They may even be trying to do it over Canthal, which would, I think, make a lot of people happy because the flavor of nickel is a change. But in general, more companies are probably going to be coming out with it, more technology evolving. Hopefully as it goes forward, people love it. And for people that were getting iffy builds or trouble with their wicking or their coiling, this will kind of force you to do it right, but then reward you with a stellar vape for that effort. So you'll want to get it right, and it'll become, I think, a self-fulfilling prophecy that as we learn and get more stable builds and discover in general which atomizers just don't go along with the program, as we weed all that out, temp control will become better and better for the average user, and I do see it becoming the next wattage setting. I think a lot of people will want it, and once they see the benefits, they won't be able to go backwards to their old, 100 watt whatevers. So, but we'll see. And the wattage, that's another issue for some folks. The numbers I've heard to convert from joules to watts is multiply by 60, divide by 48. Whether that's true or not, we're still hitting far less the 100 watt mark. The DNA 40, even in its boost mode, will give you 23 amps or thereabouts. But it's still, there's devices out there that can hit much harder than that on just a strictly power standpoint. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's not, that the temp control isn't going down that road yet. But chances are they will. The IPV claims to have the 100 watts, but it's still actually only a 50 joule device. So, and that brings up another issue, accuracy. I've never tested one. I'm still waiting for my IPv4 to be shipped because I'm pulling out for the black ones. But rumor on the street is those are a little bit less accurate. So even those little nuances, supposedly same chip family, but a couple bucks shaved off, so a couple bucks out in the design process perhaps. So you kind of get what you pay for, and I would state that with the DNAs. I do think they're a higher priced devices is what they've wound up finding themselves into, but if more modders pick them up, and with the resistance lock being able to cure most of their biggest complaints, and the battery bar is still a little weird, but that's, I think, a statement to their health monitoring, that they're really trying to be proactive about protecting you from a bunk battery. So, okay, I don't want a bunk battery, but with all of them, you kind of have to accept your limitations. The Yeehee, I think, is probably a good solid chip, but there's not as many bells as whistles. There's obviously no health monitoring from what I can understand of the battery. So, anyway, there's still a lot of trade-offs that you have to make. But in general, I think the temp control technology is to the point where it should be sold, and it's safely being implemented, and it gives you a rewarding vape experience if you're willing to suck it up and rebuild everything with nickel, because that's basically what you have to do. Take all your Canthal and throw it away and start over. But hey, most of us got on this rebuilding side, so we like to fiddle anyway. So is that the worst thing on it? Yeah, it was a fun couple days. So, but in general, the temp control thing, how it works, still a little bit of variation out there, but I think that the general principle is going to carry through, that the resistance of the wire will tell the mod what the temperature of the coil should be, and then we will have to fine-tune it to get that exactly where we would like. I don't think they're ever without having an active temperature probe, which will then have to be just a calibrated piece of resistance wire in general. And yeah, so if we're willing to live with the inaccuracies, we're there. If they want to work on that, it's going to take a lot more R&D and probably intelligence on the tank side and the coil side for the manufacturers to be able to talk to the mods, but low juice warnings. There's a lot of things I think that could be brought to the table if that ever happened. Even drip tip temperatures. You know, there's a lot of stuff that you could tiddle around with, but would it be worth their R&D dollars? Probably not. Will they continue to push temp control to get it in everybody's hands? Probably. So whether you like it or not, I would say that with twisted Canthal and nickel builds, which I understand work quite well, I'm still on strictly nickel. I'm trying to just force myself to get used to the taste of it. Isn't any bad once it breaks in, but yeah, if you didn't like nichrome, you're certainly not going to like nickel. But it is what it is. Is it worth it for the technology for me? Yes. Right now I'm using it on a Kraken with a twin stainless steel Genesis and a sub tank. That's today's, or mini sub. Today's rotation, and I do like them in both of them. The mini sub, dry hitting every once in a while. Sometimes those wicking issues can come to light. And Genesis, woo, no more hotspots. Hey, that's all I gotta say there. And it does work. It does not give me hotspots. I love it. I was kind of wondering, and I tried it, and whoo, bing. So, but there again, you know, a little dialing in. Let's see here. The Genesis is set to, boy, 257. And the mini sub, she's at 400 degrees. Both are providing equal temperature vape, but the differences in the atomizers just cause those to have different resistance values to their temperature real values. So, now, are we there exactly yet with the numbers? No, maybe they could even just change the temperature scheme a little bit to kind of a more generic number like the joules, and maybe if we don't know what it's supposed to be, we'll all be happy. I don't know. But the fact that it doesn't burn cotton, the fact that you can have wicking issues, you can have a kind of a, you know, learning curve with your new device and still have it protect you from just that terrible, raunchy, nasty flavor of a burnt hit going down, and now burning up your cotton and having to re-wick the thing on the side of the road. You know, who knows what you can get yourself into in one bad hit. All that's pretty much behind you. You don't have to worry about it completely going nuclear and whacking it. If you set something crazy or if you have a bad connection, then you're going to have some, you know, problems, but it will do what you tell it to. And so I do see it going forward being, people get their arms around it once they forgive it for the price, and that's part of it. It's popping up in the higher end devices. Now the waiting list for the IPv4 I think speaks to how bad people want it, but it's just not necessarily affordable yet for every person. We'll get there. But with temp control and with vaping in general, you do get what you pay for. So if you're going to hold out for the cheaper models and, you know, maybe use that as your first judgment on the technology itself, you know, you might be disappointed, but it might not be the technology. It might be the device. So think about that when you're out there shopping around and using your, like Grim Green's analogy, vape budget hands. You got this hand, you know, you got your quality and durability and, you know, pride of ownership and hopefully reliability and functionality, and this hand you just get the mighty dollar. You know, how much you got, one of each. Which hand gets heavier for you? Pick it for yourself. I can't answer that, but I can say after using the technology, I do like it, and I do think it will become even more popular as it gets cheaper and a few kinks worked out. But so that's all I gotta say on the whole thing. Doing nickel bills, there's a lot of videos out there. I'm not even gonna attempt to get into that, at least not at this point, simply because I haven't found one I would say this is it, do it every time. Each addy is a little bit different, each set a little bit different. Surprisingly, the most vapor production I've had in general out of a dripper is a Magma running 32 gauge nickel, pure nickel. 32 gauge on a dripper! It's crazy. The temp control just changes a lot of things. So kind of take a step back, just say, okay, and don't buy the 28 gauge right out of the get-go just because it's easier to work with. If you're using a DNA, its sweet spot is higher than what some of your 28 gauge builds will come into, especially with a dual or quad coil. So think about the gauge, and hey, if you have to recoil every time you re-wick at this point, you know, there again, a lot of trade-offs, but the gauge of the wire isn't necessarily as critical to just the raw vapor production because the technology is that different on how it applies and manages the power. So, I don't think I can think of much else to say. Thank you for watching, and vape safely.